So welcome everybody, and thank you for joining today on this busy Sunday of yours and dedicating the time to hear Yael Dreznik. So before we start, and we're gonna jump right into it for the sake of time, I just want to tell you about this Zoom webinar series is basically a collaboration between several organizations, and one of them, which I'm part of, both of them, is Hope for Israel Alliance. And Hope for Israel Alliance, it's a worldwide collaboration of expats, Israelis and Israeli supporters, volunteers focusing on fighting anti-Semitism at home or wherever the local communities are, and advocating for the immediate return of the 101 hostages, and of course supporting the Israel democracy. So that's the Hope of Israel. And in addition to that, we're collaborating very closely on multiple of these webinars with the AJMA. And I'll tell you about the AJMA in a second. But just to give you an introduction for this, what we're going to do today is we're lucky to have Yael, and we're going to have about 60 up to 75 minutes max. That's with a hard stop. If there's going to be a lot of Q&A, and I suspect there's going to be many good questions for Yael and her insights. So this is going to be recorded. We are on video, the three of us, but please feel free to add any comments or questions on the Q&A, which you can see below the screen. So with that, I think I forgot to introduce myself. Hello, I'm Yair Lev, and I'm in the area of Philadelphia. But I'd like to introduce now Michelle Stravitz. And Michelle Stravitz is the CEO. She has a very long and very impressive bio, but I'll be relatively quick, so I'm going to cut it a little bit. But she's the CEO of the American Jewish Medical Association. And we just talked about it before we started the recording. It's an organization, and she may talk a little bit about more about it, formed in the wake of October 7th, and it's a non-political, non-profit organization, really comprised of Jewish healthcare professionals, physicians, nurses, technicians, anybody to do with healthcare, enriching the community with unified voice for the Jewish healthcare workers. And they've been doing a lot of amazing work to unite people together and fight back against the crazy anti-Semitism that we see everywhere, including in healthcare. And the work that Michelle and Yael, not this Yael, but Yael Alas, the founder and president of the organization, has been just unbelievable. And I would really encourage any healthcare provider that you know of, including yourselves, to join this really, really important organization. Michelle has been previously, the CEO and CFO of multiple nonprofit organizations. Yeah, that's basically it. And I'd pass it to Michelle.
Thank you, Yair. It is a pleasure to be here. Very honored to be here with you and also Yael. It's going to be my pleasure in a moment to introduce Yael to everyone and her book. But I just wanted to follow on what Yair is saying. The American Jewish Medical Association was founded really in response, as he said, to a lot of the challenges we were seeing over the past year, including anti-Semitism in the healthcare space. But we also do a lot of other things that just help bring people's Jewish identity and their healthcare profession together. So bringing those together, we have an amazing mentorship program. So senior physicians and faculty member can mentor medical students and residents and junior physicians. We're planning medical missions to Israel, both for students and for professionals. We do a lot of interesting webinars, some of which help us to understand issues in anti-Semitism, but many of which also connect us to Israel, connect us to each other and our Jewish identity, and include various forms of professional development that are perhaps unique to the Jewish community. We've had presentations by Jewish chaplains, Jewish hospice workers, Jewish social workers. We have upcoming professional series, including how to train to speak to the media, how to train to be an expert witness, and other things. So there's a lot of ways that you can bring these together. And I do urge everyone to join the AJMA. Yair and I both shared the website. We need every voice. We need every member, and we want you to join our really warm and vast, very fast-growing community. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Yael Dreznik. Yael Dreznik is a senior pediatric surgeon at Schneider Children's Hospital. Honestly, I could stop right there and that would be incredible all by itself. But she is also a writer, and maybe best of all, she's the mother of two lovely daughters, One of them is currently a combat soldier. Yael Dreznik was born in Israel and grew up in a town near Tel Aviv. She never aspired to be a doctor, and after her military service, she decided to become an economist, earning both her bachelor's and master's degrees in economics. She began working in the Ministry of Finance and quickly advanced to head of life insurance department at a relatively young age. And then, in the middle of her career, she had a revelation. One bright day, she felt the urge to switch to medicine and study to become a doctor. And so at the age of 28, with a young baby at home, she began studying medicine at Tel Aviv University. After completing her medical studies, she decided to specialize in general surgery, continue her residency in pediatric surgery, a field she has grown passionate about during her medical education. Starting from 2021, Yael Dreznik has been a senior surgeon at Schneider Children's Hospital in Israel, focusing, among other things, on surgical oncology. She most recently wrote the book Battles in White, which I have read. It's hard to see it because of my background setup, but I have read it and marked it up. Really interesting, and I will let her tell you a little bit about the book itself and some of the people that she features in it. So I'll let you take it away, Yael.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here, and I would like to start to share my screen, and I'm very excited to be here with you. And I think what you're doing is really amazing and so important. And my lecture will focus on the story of the medical nursing and rescue teams during the October 7th surprise attack by Hamas at the State of Israel. And it's hard. I'm just sharing my screen now. Do you see it?
Not quite yet.
We don't see it yet. Maybe you need to press on something again.
Just a moment. Yes, I will share it again.
There we
No?
go.
Yep.
Yeah, great. So it will be now it's okay, right? It will be a hard story, a realistic story, and I will start with the beginning, okay? So about 2 weeks after October 7th, I made a decision to collect the stories of doctors, paramedics, nurses, and other medical professionals to tell the story of the largest mass casualty event that has ever occurred on Israeli soil and one of the largest in the world. One of the things that surprised me while conducting research for the book was the fact that no books have been written from a medical perspective about other mass casualty events around the world. We see here nor about the 9/11, nor about other disasters. And when I wrote the book, I posted a hashtag inviting medical professionals to contact me and share their stories about October 7th, as you see in the picture here. The book, which contains over 20 interviews with professionals, was published a few months ago in Israel and has since been translated into English and is available on Amazon. So the book starts with the 5th of October. 5th of October was a sunny Thursday in Israel. We were celebrating the holiday of Sukkot and preparing to return to post-holiday routine. One of my close friends is Rotem. Rotem is an ICU nurse. We see her in the picture, and also the trauma nurse in charge at Sheba Medical Center, the largest hospital in Israel. At that time, Sheba was preparing to open a new fortified ICU, and everyone was busy transferring all the beds to the new unit. The move was scheduled for about a month later at the beginning of November, and Rotem was using this time to be with her family. We see here, this is Rotem Nis Shira. She is a soldier in the army, serving as a soldier at the Nahal Oz base. She's been in the army for a year now, and every time she stays on base over the weekend, her parents drive over with homemade food. She loves her role in the army and is apparently quite good at it. And in the future, she wants to become a nurse, just like Rotem. She is here in the picture. A week before October 7th, Shira flew with her mother, Rotem's sister, to a trip with Vienna, and that the same Friday, here we see the 6th of October, I, with my family, like Rotem, also decided to spend time in the north. We went camping, setting up a tent alongside the family's around house. We see here my husband and my daughter and our dog. And the same Friday, Magen David Adom, the Israel's National Emergency Medical Services, conducted its daily situation assessment, as all rescue organizations must prepare the readiness level each day. So MADA, which is the official rescue organization in Israel, has a total of 1,400 ambulances, of which 300 are intensive care units. That day, a decision was made to raise the alert level for Saturday to about level B, meaning that half of the rescue vehicles would be manned. One of the people who made the decision was Dr. Rafi Strugo, the chief physician of Magen David Adom. The reason for raising the alert level was partly due to the holiday, as mass events were expected. On that Saturday, the Bruno Mars concert was scheduled to take place in Yarkon Park, Tel Aviv, and my eldest daughter was also supposed to attend the concert. That same Friday in southern Israel, 3 senior doctors from Soroka Medical Center, the largest hospital in the south, went to bed. None of them had received any special alerts, and they planned to spend another day of vacation with their families. One of them was Dr. Amit Frankel. You see him from the left of the picture. And another was Dr. Ella Shire. She's a senior physician at the ER, and Dr. Amit Frankel is an intensive care specialist. The third was Dr. Eitan Neeman, a pediatric intensive care specialist, who was also on call at the hospital that weekend. Not far from there, there is a station at Magen David Adom in the Negev. On that Friday, the paramedic on duty was Menachem Blumenthal, who, along with his ambulance driver, was working a 24-hour shift until Saturday morning. At 2 a.m., they drove by the Nova party in Re'im, where thousands of participants were celebrating, to check that everything was fine. No one needed assistance, and another ambulance was already stationed at the event, providing medical services. Menachem and his driver went to sleep, planning to finish their shift around 7 a.m. It was 6:30, Saturday, October 7. At that exact moment, dozens of alarms blared across the country, mainly in the south and central regions, as thousands of rockets were launched from the Gaza Strip towards these areas. The screen filled with alerts of red alerts, and within minutes, television broadcasters interrupted the programming, shocked by the number and intensity of the rocket launches. On the ground, reports of casualties were already coming in. What was not yet known in those first few minutes was that under the cover of these intense rocket attacks, terrorists had breached several points along the border fence, and thousands of heavily armed Hamas terrorists were making their way into Israel. At 7 in the morning, Dr. Yoram Klein, head of the trauma unit at Sheba Medical Center, is on his way to the hospital after realizing that the rocket fire hasn't stopped. He is preparing to receive casualties. Yoram's friend, who holds a senior position in the police force, sends him a telegram video showing terrorists driving a pickup truck in the city of Sderot, and he is convinced it's fake news. She tells him the terrorists have invaded Israel. He can't believe that this is the reality. Despite everything, he prepares for a mass casualty event and calls the entire team to come in from home. At that moment, the emergency hotlines were overwhelmed with nonstop calls. Initially, the calls were from civilians injured by rocket fire, but gradually the calls became more and more unimaginable. People were whispering on the phone because terrorists had entered their homes. For example, that day, Magen David Adom Center handled over 20,000 calls, one of which came in during the early hours of the morning. In this particular scene, we see the Idan family. This is their last photo together, taken moments before terrorists murdered the father and the mother in front of their children. The 2 older children, the eldest is only 10 years old, ran to the safe room and called Magen David Adom for help. The dispatcher tried to ascertain if the parents were still alive, but quickly she realized the children were in danger. she instructed them to hide in a closet. Through that call, she was able to save the children's life as they hid in the closet for over 10 hours until military forces rescued them. Not far from them, Menachem, the paramedic, was awakened by the sirens and soon received a call about a civilian injured by rocket fire in one of the kibbutzim. He and the ambulance driver planned to pick up the wounded person and rush him to the hospital. Menachem asked the driver to take Highway 232, we see here in the picture, unaware at that time that the road was filled with hundreds of terrorists along its length. For some unknown reason, the ambulance driver decided to take side roads instead, a decision that saved both of their lives. They reached the injured person and tried to make their way to the hospital, but the road was blocked. Their only option was to seek shelter in a synagogue. We see here the synagogue in the picture. And they decided to turn the synagogue into a field hospital, and throughout the day, they treated around 15 injured people in makeshift conditions until they could be evacuated. Another rescue organization that operated that day was United Hatzalah, which together with Maged David Adom treated hundreds and thousands of injured people. One of them was an airborne paramedic named Avi Marcus, who arrived by rescue helicopter to an area where hundreds of casualties had accumulated that day. It's important to remember that there was constant rocket fire, and they had to carry out multiple tasks at lightning speed, performing quick triage to decide who should be airlifted and who shouldn't, as well as performing rapid intubations in the field. They were required to complete all of this in less than 10 minutes per casualty. Near the area where hundreds of casualties had gathered is Barzilai Hospital, another hospital in addition to Soroka, where Aliza, a senior social worker, is employed. Aliza knows the police officers from the Sderot police station well through her work, and that day she rushed from home to the hospital as soon as she realized there were sirens and rockets. The first patients she encountered were those same officers from the Sderot station, some arriving at the hospital in critical condition. In the children's emergency room, 2 children and their mother arrived. The mother was unable to speak and was given sedatives. One of the children recounted how terrorists entered the home, murdered his father, opened the refrigerator, and drank a Coke. In the picture, we see the father on the right who was murdered, and the terrorist captured by the family's security cameras in the yard. Aliza had to support these children as they told this unimaginable story, all while discovering that the eldest child, who wasn't at home and had gone surfing at Zikim Beach, has also been murdered there by terrorists who came from the sea. And this wasn't the only story Aliza struggled to deal with as a social worker that day. Meanwhile, in central Israel, where the largest children's hospital in the Middle East, Schneider Children's Medical Center, is located, the hospital CEO, Dr. Efrat Borna-Lev, arrived early in the morning and realized she had to move all departments to protect areas and special shelters. This was a complex operation involving the transfer of oncology patients, premature babies weighing less than a kilogram, and children on ECMO machines. Each patient required at least an hour of preparation to the transfer, all while rocket fire continued in the background. One of the most notable patients born that day was Noah, a premature baby weighing 800 grams, who was moved to the protected area amidst the ongoing rocket fire. Noah is now bigger. By midday, the fighting between terrorists and the few forces in the southern kibbutzim intensified. In Kibbutz Be'eri, a battle was unfolding near the dental clinic. That morning, 2 medical professionals arrived at the clinic, Amit Man, a paramedic of Magen David Adom, and Dr. Daniel Levy, an ENT physician from Soroka. Both lived in Be'eri and rushed to treat the wounded inside the clinic. By noon, they were overpowered and murdered by Hamas terrorists who had taken over the clinic, while security forces tried to reach the kibbutz from other directions. One of the doctors with the special forces was Dr. Aviv, a surgeon by profession and a physician in an elite unit. Aviv and his team arrived at Kibbutz Be'eri and set up in an area where he could treat the wounded coming from all parts of the kibbutz. Soldiers provided cover for Aviv while he performed life-saving procedures such as inserting chest tube, performing coniotomies, and administering blood products until it was safe to evacuate the wounded. An essential concept in trauma care is the golden hour. Trauma mortality can occur in 3 time frames. Patients who die almost immediately are those with catastrophic vascular or severe head injuries. Most of them are nearly impossible to save in the field. Those at risk of dying in the first few hours are critically injured patients losing blood, whether from gunshot wounds or blunt trauma. These are the patients who must be identified and treated quickly. This is the golden hour. Lastly, patients who die later often succumb to organ failure or sepsis. Aviv noticed that most of the patients he treated had circulation conditions. They were losing blood due to gunshot wounds, and that he didn't have enough blood products to stabilize them. This shortage of resources was a recurring issue, a reality mentioned by everyone I spoke to who provided care in the field. It's a crucial principle in mass casualty events of this magnitude. I'd like to talk about numbers a bit to try to grasp the scale of the event itself. At Soroka Hospital alone, nearly 700 wounded arrived within a few hours. We're talking about dozens of casualties per hour, with 80 patients arriving at the emergency room between 12 and 1 p.m., some critically and severely injured. These numbers were incredibly difficult to process at that stage, especially considering that the trauma room typically has only 6 beds prepared to treat critically injured patients. One of the critical decisions made in those moments was to double the number of beds in the trauma room to 12. This decision was a game changer, allowing the team to treat a much larger number of injured patients simultaneously. One of the most important issues to discuss, and one of the last to discuss in the context of a mass casualty event, is the treatment of anxiety victims. And one of the doctors interviewed for the book was a psychiatrist at Soroka Hospital who described treating anxiety victims during those hours. Generally, when discussing a mass casualty event, it's essential to understand that alongside the injured come victims with psychological trauma, suffering from conditions such as panic attack or various catatonic states. It's important to gather these victims in one location close to the emergency room, but without interfering with the ongoing treatment of the psychically wounded. And that day at Soroka, 3 main groups of anxiety victims arrived. The first were people who had been at the Nova Festival and managed to escape. These were mostly young people, some under the influence of drugs, requiring more complex mental health treatment. The second group, which arrived a little later, were soldiers. Some were in a catatonic state, unable to communicate with the medical staff, making it impossible to even identify who they were. And the third group who arrived later in the afternoon. They were families who had been evacuated from the burning kibbutz. These were people who had witnessed the horrors and murders of family members. Each group required extensive care from the mental health teams. One of the characteristics of an anxiety victim is a tendency to catastrophize the events they have experienced. For example, when one anxiety victim told a psychiatrist that he saw his friends being kidnapped to Gaza, she initially thought he was exaggerating, that he was catastrophizing the events he had gone through, but later she saw videos on telegrams and realized everything he had said was true, and that all the tools and protocols she had known for treatment were irrelevant. She had to find new ways to cope with a situation she had never encountered before. As night fell on Israel, 2 one-year-old twins arrived at the Soroka pediatric emergency room. They were found in one of the kibbutzim near the bodies of the murdered parents. No one knew their names, nor how to locate the relatives. In those moments, it was medical students who had been called in to help with the chaos in the hospital, who held them, fed them, and comforted them. It's important to mention the role of medical students, who were an integral part of the overall effort. They moved between patients, documenting photos and names, helped to calm families, and prepared lists for locating the missing. Later on, Rotem, my friend the nurse at Sheba Hospital, was busy treating dozens of casualties when she received the message that the military base where her nephew, Shira, had been completely burned down. Shira was not answering her phone, and Rotem could no longer stay and help in the emergency room. She got permission to leave and drove to his sister's house, while Shira's father took the car and drove to Nahal Oz base, where his daughter was stationed. The journey led him to the gates of hell. Smoke and the smell of burning filled the air, and bodies of dead soldiers were scattered across the base. He searched for his daughter with the light of his iPhone, shouting, "Shira, it's dead, answer me." Then he saw the body of a female soldier with nail polish like Shira's and hair like Shira's. He called home and said to his family, "I found her. I found Shira." The book written about all these events and many others had been published both in Israel and on Amazon globally. The goal was not just to recount the events of October 7th. It was to tell the story of how we, as medical professionals, coped with the mass casualty event, an event that, as mentioned, had been scarcely documented in literary terms until now. There are several characteristics of such an event, which are reflected in the acronym I mention here. Perhaps one of the most touching aspects was the emotional burden. The fact that every medical professional interviewed had some personal connection to the event itself, whether it was a family member or a close friend who was in danger, adding an even greater level of complexity to experience. One of the most moving things that happened after the book's release was that hundreds of people worldwide began to buy it, not just medical professionals. Recently, the father of one of my patients, who holds a senior position at a Chinese company, decided to help me translate the book into Chinese. This way, I hope our story will also reach readers in China. Additionally, I want to emphasize that the profits from the book are donated to charity. This was my promise to everyone who participated in the interviews for the book. Here you can see me in a photo with the President of Israel, who received a copy of the book in both Hebrew and English. And in the additional photos, you can see the projects that have begun thanks to the book's profits. I really would like to thank you all for listening and hope you find the strength to read the book and share it with your friends.
Wow, thank you so much, Yael. Before we sort of launch into a discussion and maybe some questions, I just want to encourage everyone who's listening to take a deep breath. No, I'm not a medical professional or a mental health professional, but I know that it's important for us to all just take a couple of deep breaths and process some of the stories that we heard. There was a lot of heavy stories there, and they came at us quickly. So just take a moment to process. I have a lot of questions, and also from reading the book itself. One of the things I appreciate about the presentation is seeing the pictures of some of the people that you talked about in the book, because seeing their faces makes them come alive just a little bit more, even as you had described them. You talked about the ABCDEs, and I also sort of, some of them are the same, but I was in hearing all of the different stories and all of the different things you just presented, there were 5 different elements that several of them might be somewhat typical in a mass casualty event, but all of them, the confluence of all of them at the same time made this particularly unique. And I wanted you to comment on it. I'm going to talk about the 5 that I observed just from reading, and then see if we can either discuss or hear you comment. One was that there was just a simple confusion and lack of information. So you talked about people thinking it was fake news, like how could this all be happening at the same time? So you had these healthcare professionals operating in an environment of major confusion, and the normal channels of learning the information that you need in an emergency were not really working the same way they normally would, I think. A second is that in the midst of all of it, you had healthcare professionals getting notice that they had to also be recruited to the reserve. So while you were hospitals were trying to have as many professionals on staff, to deal with the volume, you had them being pulled, and many of them as early as the day of October 7th, as I recall. Then you had the simple volume of injured patients that you talked about, the numbers you talked about, having to increase the trauma beds in the ER. There were both physical injuries and psychological trauma, anxiety, fear, shock, right? So you had the number of people coming into the hospitals. Then you had, like Rotem, healthcare professionals that were operating in this environment and worrying about their own loved ones that were in danger. One of the things about Israel being so small, as I recall from this whole year, is that no one was left untouched. But particularly at a place like Schneider, you had the healthcare professionals also had relatives who were in danger. They were worried about them. They didn't know their whereabouts. They didn't know their conditions. And then at some of these hospitals, like Soroka, you had the rockets coming at them in the middle of it, and you had to take the patients and the staff down to protected areas underground. So you had 5 things all happening at once. Can you comment on that and what you learned from these professionals, how they coped with all these multiple things at once?
I think that the hardest story that I've heard, this is why I started the book with Rotem and ended the book with Rotem. I remember that when I published the hashtag that I want to interview healthcare professionals to this book, the first call was from Rotem. I remember how she sat in my balcony, and I was, listening to her story, and I couldn't breathe. I think we talked about 3 hours, and I didn't know what happened. I was shocked, and I think what happened to the healthcare professionals that were, struggled from one hand to help patients, and from other to just to reach out their family members that were the soldiers. I for one, for example, my daughter is a combat soldier, and at that moment I had a call from Schneider that I was, on call, and I knew that my daughter would be shifted to, to the south. So I was like torn. I started to cry. I didn't know what to do with myself. And Rotem was, I can't imagine how bad it was for her in these moments. And finally, she understood that she cannot be in the hospital. She must, go out and help with her, go to her sister and to see what's going on. I think this is the hardest part of, of what has been in that day. At first, of course, it was like a fake news. We didn't really understood what's going on. I remember I saw also, like Dr. Klein, in the Telegram, the pictures that you see a Hamas terrorist going from house to house. I remember that I had a thought like, it's not real. Something, it's not here in our country. I think I realized that it's real only a lot of hours after the event had started. So the fake news, I think we thought it was fake for much time that I think we wanted to. That's for the the 2 main I know things that you said.
So the story of Rotem, interesting that you bring that up, and you started with it and ended with it. I actually visited the Machane Shura in May, and I met some of the people that processed the bodies as they came in. And one of the people who was a lead there spoke to our group and specifically told me about Shira's story, about how her father brought her thinking he had his daughter.
Yeah.
And only 2 days later found out it wasn't even her.
Wow.
And they specifically talked about that as one of the most traumatic moments for them to
I didn't know.
respond to. Yeah, so that's a really difficult one. So it's interesting. I remember that from the other side.
Yeah. One of the craziest stories, you know, like destiny and, you know, how we cannot imagine things is that my daughter's best friend is also a soldier in Nahal Oz, was a soldier in Nahal Oz base. And she decided to go to go abroad in that specific Saturday. And Shira decided to go abroad 1 week before. So, you know, it's just a decision that you made. And I mean, half of her friends, you know, were dead or were kidnapped. And I remember just calling my daughter. She was, I couldn't reach my daughter for a few days. She didn't return home for 1 month after the 7th of October. I remember that I called my daughter and told her that half of her friend were dead. And it was one of the hardest calls that I ever had done with my daughter.
I'm sure. Yair and Yael, you're both physicians. Just speaking about this particular issue we were talking about, where the healthcare professionals were dealing with this unbelievable mass casualty event, but then also processing what was happening to their own families, like you knowing your daughter was going to go into combat, and Rotem knowing her niece we didn't know where she was, and so many of the doctors, nurses, psychiatrists, social workers probably had that also. How do you all use, what skills do you use to sort of, you know, compartmentalize and put that aside so you can focus on the patients?
You want to?
I think it's a question mostly for you, based on the interviews with so many, you know, physicians, healthcare providers, nurses. But my answer is that whenever I'm in a situation, I'm fully present. And then it's very hard to become distracted.
I remember that, you know, one day after I had surgery, I had a patient with neuroblastoma. So we had to, you know, remove the tumor. And I remember that, you know, when you are in the surgery, you know, when I finished the surgery, it was like, I'm still there. There is still the 7th of October. I should see what's going on in the news. But in the surgery itself, I was, you know, of course, I wasn't preoccupied. But afterwards, I was, you know, it was overwhelming, everything. And I agree with the Yair, we have to be present at all time. But it was so hard. It's like, you know, it's like a PTSD. And whenever I give this lecture, I feel the burden inside me. It's so hard. Then I cry afterwards. It's really hard.
I want to ask a question. It's actually a question to both Yael and Michelle, not only for Yael. And first of all, thank you again for sharing this very powerful story with us. And I'll tell you why I think this is so important, that you're talking to us and you're talking to, you know, other people that you lectured. And I think that we should keep on hearing this. And that is maybe the greatest challenge, that it's almost a war that Michelle, myself, ADL, you know, Stand With Us are dealing with, is this crazy upside down narrative. What we are dealing with in the United States and all over the world is, you know, horrible misinformation. And for example, you know, in the healthcare, one of the things that happened in my institution was that they decided to bring, supported by the university, they decided to bring one of the doctors, Irfan Ibrahim Galaria, and he was working in Gaza, and he came in, and we really tried to explain to the administration not to have the stock because it's going to be so unilateral. But they decided to have and proceed the stock. And, you know, and I went, myself and another Jewish person went, and I've never witnessed in my life so much incitement and hatred towards Jewish people and Israel. And throughout this conversation, he was talking about how IDF were snipering on purpose, murdering children. And now he heard the drones aiming to do this, and how he held a child who was not, all these horrible stories. Not once did he mention Hamas. Not once did he mention the fact that this most horrific, one of the most horrible attacks, violent, ugly massacres ever known to humanity, proudly recorded with their cameras, and happy and calling their parents in excitement and drinking the Coke after another brutal murder of children. 101, we still have 101 hostages over there, including babies. Who would even consider doing this? We know that the Hamas are basically shooting and, from hospitals, from houses. We know that they want to increase the Palestinian suffering because it will turn the attention of the world against us. And this is real. We see this what Michelle is doing. I can't even tell you how many hours a day she's spending on news stories similar to this. And all of this that I'm saying is that why it is so important, not only for us to remember and suffer the pain and think about the kidnapped people, but it's so important to keep on remembering this narrative and talking and explaining, not only to Jewish people who think like us, but, in universities and grand rounds and medical schools everywhere, because this is not a unilateral situation. It's a horrible situation that was created by the Hamas on October 7th and way before in their planning. So I'll stop here. As you can see, I'm emotional and angry about this because it's every single day we see these occurrences and it's horrible. So I don't know who wants to start, Yael or Michelle.
Michelle, you're doing so much, please.
So I'll just respond to kind of some of what Yair is talking about, which is patterns that we're seeing in the US and why it is so important for the stories that you're telling to get out, because that's the truth. And it's also a demonstration of how pained the healthcare profession was in Israel, but also how incredibly resilient and brave and what they dealt with and how compassionate people are in Israel. And yet the stories that are told here, the narrative that is spread in presentations like Yair talked about is very different than that. And what we're seeing as a pattern is that the healthcare community, the language of healthcare, the community itself, the platform of the health community is being hijacked by these false narratives. So they're using the healthcare community in a variety of ways to talk about things that aren't true or very exaggerated or quite opposite what the reality really was. We're seeing speakers like he talked about being brought to hospitals and medical institutions and medical schools and medical association conferences where they tell stories of the situation in Gaza, but there's a lot of, it is, like he said, one-sided, certainly one-sided, and also ignoring, assuming that the fault lies entirely in the hands of Israel and ignoring the blame of Hamas for it. So when they talk about the healthcare, they'll focus on the healthcare system in Gaza, being so broken now, but they blame Israel for creating that, as opposed to blaming Hamas for putting them in the position where, terrorists and weapons are being stored in hospitals, and they're using that as a shield. So that's just one example. So they'll tell that story and leave out all the part that he said blames Hamas, and also specifically blame Israel. And it's a narrative that's, again, it's being hijacked in a way that it's believable. There are several dangers of this that are, besides just feeling infuriating and telling people false narratives. It's dangerous because the healthcare community is a trusted community. So physicians like yourselves, there's a high level of trust in healthcare professionals. So when a healthcare professional tells this story, particularly some that have been to Gaza and tell their version of it, it's very believable. It's very believed. And so they're using that, again, they're using that platform against Israel in a very dangerous way. And so this is one of the things we try to push back on. A lot of these institutions, hospitals, universities, medical associations think that they're putting appropriate guardrails on the presentations and that it's okay to tell them. There are there are real stories coming out of Gaza. There are medical tragedies, there is trauma, there are, it is a terrible humanitarian crisis. And so there is a medical conversation, but they're not putting the guardrails on, they're not sufficient to prevent false narratives, lies, accusations, and so on. So I think that's part of the problem of what we're seeing in general. Telling the other side of the story, the incredible humanity and compassion and the tragedies that happened in Israel is important. I think one of the challenges we face in it, to be honest, is that people don't want to hear it. They don't want to listen. They don't believe it. And so the more real information we can share, I think the better. And there's certain group of people you're never going to reach. They're never going to hear it. But there's a group of people that are already on, like me and Yair, and we're already on that page. We don't need to be convinced, but there's a whole lot of people in the middle where this information can make a difference and can be influential. So you never know what nugget of information is going to make a difference for them. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, if I may. One of the questions we have is what mental health or resilience support is available for the healthcare teams around October 7th? And continuing today, like what are we doing to help people that dealt with this?
So it's a great question that I've been asked a lot about. Not all the hospitals in Israel have like a plan. It's called in Hebrew chosen. It means that there are specific groups that helps physicians cope with the emotional burden that they have been had since October 7th. So we have it in Soroka and also in Barzilai, but not in all hospitals. So there is much more awareness to the mental health of our profession. We know that physicians are much more. I'm not sure that much more, but we are more know how to handle difficult situations, like mentally difficult situations, because we deal with every day. But we know that there are groups that are less you are more prone to develop like a acute stress disorder, like the sanitars, for example. And we should focus on these groups, and there is much more effort after the October 7th to reach these groups here in Israel.
I think one of the challenges you're probably dealing with,
No, you go ahead.
My understanding is that there's such a shortage, there's just not enough mental health professionals to support everybody in the country. Like the whole country's traumatized in various ways. And so, there's just so many people. You've got the citizens, you've got the victims, you've got the survivors of Nova, you've got people from all the kibbutzim that have been through so much. You have the IDF soldiers, you have the medical professionals. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. So
yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I had a question about the specifically there's a lot of people who in our community were discussing at the beginning the survivors of Nova, because that was in a way, and I don't know if you've had a lot of experience with the people who have worked with them, especially with psychological needs to process their trauma, but many people are only imagining how they're some of them were just enjoying and maybe under the influence of drugs and just enjoying nature, and suddenly this nightmare that maybe many people couldn't even process or understand. I mean, even normal people in a normal situation, like you mentioned before, they thought it was fake news. Have you seen much from physicians or therapists dealing with the post-trauma of October 7th with these people who survived?
I must tell you that the interesting conversation that I had was with a psychiatrist from Soroka. She is actually a pediatric psychiatrist, but in that same day, she came to the hospital and she dealt with, all the patients that were coming from, especially from the Nova Festival. And I remember that I was listening to her story, and it was interesting from one hand, and it was terrifying from the other hand, because she didn't have any, protocol to deal with. You learn as a psychiatrist to do certain things with people that are catatonic now, and they have like, they are in a panic attack, but these patients were something else. As you mentioned, they were under the influence of drugs. So they couldn't believe what is going on, and it was a other experience. And also it was it was such an traumatized experience. I'm not sure that the psychiatrist herself had I know she cried. She didn't stop crying the whole week afterwards when I talked with her, and when I had interview about the book in Israel, and I asked her if she wants, to be in the paper, in the newspaper, she told me I rather not. So in these conversations, I had a clue that she might be, trying to cope herself with what she had been through. So this is one of the aspects that were most interesting for me. I'm a surgeon, so I am not so familiar with these pathologies, but it was unimaginable.
I want to take one more question to you, Yael, that is actually, my wife is a pediatric dentist. And recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we had 4 visiting, or actually more than that, but 4 visiting students from Hadassah, from the Hebrew University, who came for a rotation here and, with different people. And there was a little event that was hosted for them in one of the houses, and they spoke. And one of the things that I thought was remarkable, and it's relevant to the next question, was that these 4 people were from such unique backgrounds. One of them was, Jewish, Chiloni, completely secular, Tel Aviv, etc. Another person came from a very, very religious Orthodox family. A third one was from a Muslim neighborhood in Jerusalem, and a fourth one was from the north in an Arab Christian family or neighborhood. And that to us, we had a conversation exactly about this. So the question from the audience is, can maybe you tell us a little bit about this du-kiyum or coexistence that you see working in a hospital in Israel, Schneider, the biggest and most important pediatric hospital in Israel, working together between Jews, non-Jewish, nurses, Israelis. How does this coexistence happen even during this animosity in the last year between, this tensions between the Arabs, the Muslims, and the Jews? And then there's one more part of the question is about, did you have to take care of during this last year of Palestinian children that somehow were able to get advanced treatments in Schneider, the biggest hospital?
Okay, so I have 3 short stories for you, like very short. The one is not a story, it's like a phrase. I think that our hospital is the healthiest place in the world. I really think so. And it's a unique phrase that I like to say it a lot, because it's a place where sick people go to, but when I come to work and I work with Muhammad and Rula, and then they are my best friends from the department, and we celebrate each other's celebrations and holidays, and I really feel the love, and I really feel that there is no hatred in the hospital itself. So this is to start with. The second very interesting story is the story of Ahmed. Ahmed is one of my dearest patients that I have seen. He was from a Gaza Strip about 2 years before the 7th of October. He came to our hospital with huge Wilms tumor in the abdomen. And it was one of the largest tumor that we had ever operated, with extensive teams from cardiothoracic surgeons and also our team and oncologists, and you name it, everyone who was, a physician in the hospital treated Ahmed from the Gaza Strip. And I remember that I went to his mom and I hugged her, and we were really close to each other. And I stayed after a night shift to see that everything is okay with Ahmed. And we had a picture with the family, and we sent him back to Gaza. And it was one of my moments as a physician that I couldn't care less who is this patient and who is he coming from. And we just saved his life. And to see that what is going on now, I, as a physician and a human being, it's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking, and I really look forward to better years that we wouldn't have to do these conversations. I'm really looking forward to this occasion. And the third is that Schneider Hospitals believes, like my friend, the CEO, Dr. Efrat Borna-Lev, that children do not belong to any war, and we actually offered our help to Gaza Strip and to help treat pediatric patients from there. And I won't tell you what was the answer. It was in the first month of the war, but of course we are physicians. We want to save lives, and it's our oath. So this is my three statements.
Thank you for that. I have a question actually to Michelle, because there was a question that disappeared. I don't know where it went, but it was a question about, oh, here it is. I think you responded. So
I think I answered it I answered it by typing.
But it's more of a general question. I think it's very relevant to anybody who is watching today or will be watching the recording, is that we see a lot of stuff that, people want to come. Let's say that we want to bring Yael to speak on this campus or that campus. And sometimes hospitals or universities, med schools are pushing back, or it's becoming difficult for them to host it because, oh, it's a political, it's this, it's that, it's pro-Israel. And for whatever reason, it's not working. In addition to that, another person asked about, Jewish Employee Resource Group, which Michelle and I are talking about it frequently, because that is kind of like, maybe you can talk a little bit about the importance. And we had a webinar about this. We're going to have another one in December about this, but I think this is all very relevant about the work that we should and can be allowed to do on campuses, universities, medical schools.
So yeah, I did answer it in the response on the Q&A, but in general, what we're finding is another pattern, which is that both in terms of scheduling speakers and in terms of journal publications, what I'll just call the other side, their story tends to be accepted more readily, both journal publications with those narratives as well as opportunities for speakers. And when we try to publish things about, the story from Israel's perspective or the tragedies that happened in Israel, they are not as readily accepted. And that's true in publications as well as the opportunity to schedule a speaker. One of the mechanisms that can help is to, in your institutions, wherever you are, hospitals, universities, employees can ask to form a Jewish Employee Resource Group. That's what ERG is. On the AJMA website, for members, there's a whole section of resources, and we include some guidelines and sample letters to form an ERG. But that allows you to host events. It allows you to use listservs. It allows you to access some of the resources that might be given to clubs or other kinds of groups in the institution. And that does help in terms of being like a formal organization within the institution that can schedule a speaker. That doesn't mean it will always, it's not so easy to form Jewish ERGs. Sometimes people get pushback that ERGs are not for faith-based groups. So we have to explain that Jewish doesn't necessarily only mean faith-based. It's your nationality, your national origin, your background. And so there's a legal precedent for forming ERGs. Institutions are supposed to allow you to, but there is often pushback. And so AJMA is helping first of all, encouraging people to form ERGs in their institutions. That gives you a mechanism, again, to push back. And well, there's a few things. One is to push back. One is to schedule things like speakers to share the stories. And the other is actually to work in partnership with the administration, because it gives you an opportunity to sort of be eyes and ears for the administration in an accepted forum. So those are all important aspects. And again, there's going to be another wonderful webinar in December on this topic. And so we encourage people to form an ERG, and we also have ways to support you. We have legal support, we have guidelines, and we have sample letters. So we're happy to help with that. And I will share that some of our partners, the ADL, also provides support on forming an ERG, and the Brandeis Center has some guidelines. There's links to those on the AJMA website, so we do provide those resources. I also wanted to, I think there was another question that we were, I'm trying to remember if there was another question. I'll just ask one of the other questions in the Q&A. Is that okay at your?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. And then I actually was going to respond a little bit to what you said earlier, but let's move on because I want to make sure we get to attendees' questions as well. How has the medical response to October 7th affected patient care today? Like, do you see changes or?
What we see, I think that it is specifically regarding military medical services. I think, you know, what we do in the battlefield, like, you know, rescue units, like like
Unit 669.
yeah, it's incredible what they can do now. That, you know, you know, it's like a muscle. You do it all over again, and you just, you know, you can intubate in like 4 minutes, and you give blood products. And I think that the IDF has, you know, really had so much experience. You know, it's experience that comes from bad things, but, you know, comes from war. But we can save lives of patients, you know, of soldiers in the battlefield, and we can move them very quick to hospital in Israel. And we gathered so much, you know, experience that we, you know, now it will be translated into, you know, manuscripts, and, you know, to try to publish it worldwide, because it's really important to know the protocols.
I wanted to, there's a comment, actually, not a question, about for Yael, that basically they're saying, you know, they're full of gratitude and blessing for what you're doing, this crucial and so important work, you know, all your energy and strength. And I want to join that, but also ask you a question. I mean, you're a really busy pediatric surgeon in the highest volume place in Israel, and you're doing crazy work as it is, plus raising a family. And on top of this, living the crazy reality of wartime that, you know, those of us who live in the United States or around the world, you know, we can maybe identify, but we can't really live. And on top of that, you also, in your mission in the last year to create this book, you have been basically immersed yourself nonstop, thinking, feeling with all these people who have, you know, you've been hearing so many difficult stories firsthand. How are you taking care of yourself with all this in the last year? How are you basically pushing forward and moving, and what is your source of strength?
I will give one last story for the end, because I think it will answer your question. You know, the profits of the book doesn't go, you know, anywhere but charity. So the last, you know, thing that I have done is to call the widow of Eitan Ne'eman, who was killed 2 days after the October 7th. And I told her, her name is also Yael. I told her, Yael, I'm gonna do like shirts, trauma shirts with the name of Eitan Ne'eman behind. And it was be to honor him and for his memory. And she was, you know, so thrilled. She told me that it was his dream to build a trauma unit in Soroka. So now we are doing it in Schneider. And I remember the call. I remember, you know, taking a photo with this this shirt. And I just, you know, I had tears, and it was the greatest way to cope with this situation, you know, just to, keep on going and to cherish the people who are, doing the really, hard things, because they are much more than me.
Well, once again, we can applaud you for doing more and more and more, it sounds like. I want to loop back. We do have one more question from one of the pediatricians from AJMA, but I do want to loop back to something you were talking about earlier and connect it to the problems we're facing here in the US. So in the US, we have a lot of physicians attacking physicians, anti-Semitism from physician to physician. We've even seen physicians posting on social media, remove all Zionists from healthcare. I mean, that kind of a global commentary. And then we have specific attacks from one physician to either a group of or individual physicians, doxing them on social media, making blacklists of Zionist healthcare professionals that you shouldn't go to, and so on. So it's really this very unhealthy relationship going on, between professionals, which I think is very dangerous. I always talk about how in the healthcare community, it's so important for you all to get along, and think of how an ER functions, and you can speak to that much better than I can, how an OR functions, you can speak to that much better than I can, and how people need to work together effectively. And when you allow geopolitical conflict to get in between them, it is so dangerous and so unhealthy for the community. We talk often about how Israeli hospitals are a shining example of how this should be done, because you all get along. You can talk about not only people from all backgrounds, not only treating people from all backgrounds, but working together with people from all backgrounds. And I think you said, was it Muhammad that you work so closely with? And I remember being at Sheba Hospital, and the head nurse's name is also Muhammad. So, in their rehab center, I think it was. So we see this incredible example in Israel, and yet somehow in the US, we don't seem to be able to make that happen. Can you tell us what you think is different? How does it work so well in Israel, and what can we learn from that?
I think that it's a really good question, I might say. I think that every country has its own, I don't know, dilemmas or conflicts. Like in Israel, we do not have as much as a conflict like abortion, like in the USA. It's not, so we don't talk it. It's not an issue like in elections, like in the USA. But we have other things that are, tearing us apart, like, the government and constitution and law. And so I think that everyone has its own problems, and but something that you said is really, really important there. I think that healthcare professionals is something sacred. This is how we said. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
We really need, it's like a shiny star, and we really need to, protect it. And it's so important because we are saving lives, and we're treating people, and we shouldn't think about what color and what religion. And it's we took an oath, and it's so important also between us. So other things, politics and other things, it's less important. But in healthcare professionals, it's we should really not do it.
But I wanted to ask you actually a follow-up question to what you just said. So, it's not only, you're not all the time you're in the OR with your hands in the guts of the child or stuff. Sometimes there's downtime. Sometimes you're sitting in the staff room and having coffee, and maybe you're sitting with an Arab surgeon that maybe is originally from, family still, maybe they have some family members still in Gaza, or maybe there are physicians who are their families, or they're originally from the settlements and more right-wing, versus somebody from Tel Aviv who is much more left-wing. Are all of these political or security, Arabs, Jews, Muslims, settlements, not settlements, Bibi, not Bibi, are they completely ignored when you're sitting together and hanging out and you just talk about medical, like I'm trying to fathom, how do you, in this crazy reality, how do you really like communicate with each other about things of that sort? Or you don't, maybe.
I think we, in a situation that we are in a war. So every one of us wants, I think that the war will be ended because, people from the north, like from Majd al-Shams, like the children that were, killed there in the Hezbollah attack, were, every one of us wants, to come to normal life again. So we are kind of in a position, not like in the United States, that there is no war there, So we are not in a normal situation. We're in a crazy situation. Like every day, soldiers are being killed. So we are just, trying to cope with with a very difficult situation. And I think, it kind of helps us not to exaggerate with our other thoughts. I really telling the truth. I don't feel what you said, and I'm sure that you feel it every day, but I'm not accustomed to what are you saying.
That's interesting. There was an article that came out a few months ago. I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, and it was called "You Can't Fight in Here, It's the OR." And it talked about the problem I just described earlier, which is, the problems we're facing in the US with people putting politics between them, but that in Israel, you all managed to work in harmony. And it said in that article that hospitals made some directives on as early as October 8th, directing people, like Yair was asking, you can talk about this, you cannot talk about this within the hospitals, so that it would maintain some of the harmony. And we have a question here. Someone was asking, like, was there a message or a directive from the hospital administration given to staff to enable continued team-oriented care, to continue patient-focused care, or did it just come from the staff?
Specifically in my hospital, I don't remember that there was a specific issue regarding, the war, the 7th of October. I'm sure, from time to time, people are arguing and we don't agree on anything.
Arguing in Israel? No.
But I don't remember that there was, something, really serious, like in action in the past year. I know that there were hospitals that it was less, we are a children's hospital, so everything is much more, warmy and tiny. But I know that maybe in Hadassah, maybe in the south, there were other, problems.
Well, there's a few more questions, and I know that Michelle has a ton of questions after reading your book. But I told you it's a hard stop at 2:15, and I wanted to thank everybody who joined on a Sunday afternoon to this really important and interesting conversation. I want to thank Michelle for also, you're so busy, you're working like 100 hours a week on doing such important work for the Jewish community, and especially in the healthcare. And Yael, toda rabba I'm so happy that I connected to you, and toda rabba for all that you have been doing in this important book, and documenting all these really important stories. We have to continue talking about it and not push it to the back of our mind. So with that, toda rabba everybody, and the recording will be available soon, and we'll share it on the groups.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for everything. Toda Yair as well. Toda.
Bye-bye.